For today's news, we're going to start off with a little bit of remembrance, which of course is the 5-year anniversary of lockdown. Diane, welcome.
Yes, thanks, Brian. Hello, Ben. Hello, Sandy. I'm really happy to be here today, but it's really unfortunate that we have to commemorate this today. Just so that we know exactly what we're commemorating, the 23rd of March, 2025, yesterday, was the 5th anniversary of Boris Johnson sending us residents of the UK some very important and scary, fearful instructions. Let's play that back again for our viewers, so remember exactly what he said to us.
From this evening, I must give the British people a very simple instruction. You must stay at home. Because the critical thing we must do to stop the disease spreading between households. That is why people will only be allowed to leave their home for the following very limited purposes. Shopping for basic necessities as infrequently as possible. One form of exercise a day, for example, a run, walk or cycle, alone or with members of your household. Any medical need to provide care or to help a vulnerable person, and travelling to and from work, but only where this is absolutely necessary and cannot be done from home.
So, just as that reminders, let's hear now, actually, what Mike Robinson and Brian Gerrish had to say just after 1 o'clock on the 23rd of March, 2020.
Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 23rd of March, 2020, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson. Myself, Brian Gerrish. We're delighted to be joined by David Scott, bringing us northern exposure from north of the border. Are you 3 feet away from me?
Possibly, maybe.
Yes, we're about as far away from each other as we can get here in the studio. Naturally, we want to follow government advice.
I really like that extra lean that you did over to the side, Brian. That was absolutely hilarious. So as Mike continued through the news, and he said, we have a quote from him here saying that today, 23rd of March 2020, is a special day in the Houses of Parliament because the emergency coronavirus bill is going through. And then he put up the next slide outlining the contents of the coronavirus bill. He went on to say that the last point on that slide, which was supporting and protecting the public to do the right thing and follow public health advice, was the one with, quote, 1984-like language, just again to show us how ahead of the curve UK Column always is when it comes to things. So just to get the exact timeline correct, 23rd of March was when Boris Johnson went on TV and told us we must stay at home. 25th of March was when the Coronavirus Act 2020 received royal assent, and the 26th of March is when lockdown measures legally came into force. So it took a few days to get us all locked up. Just imagine how many people could have died in those 4 days. It's absolutely shocking, isn't it? So sorry, that was a bit of Mike's sarcasm. Honestly, though, thank you so much to Mike Robinson, Brian Gerrish, and the others who were on the UK Column team in 2020, because you helped keep all of us sane. And I hope at that time as a member, we did the same for you. So to go into a little bit more of the media manipulation that was going on, I went onto the Wayback Machine to see what the BBC homepage looked like on the 23rd of March, 2020. And we see, among other things, Canada withdrew from the 2020 Olympics over the virus. McDonald's was going to close restaurants in the UK and Ireland. A football club was selling virtual chips to raise funds. I don't know if there was any fish to go with them, but they had chips. An A&E doctor's plea to stay indoors and isolate, why social distancing and isolation matter, and how to keep up to date with the latest virus information. It probably told everyone to keep watching the BBC when really we all should have been watching UK Column. If we go back in time just a little further, so remember what happens in the months just leading up to these lockdowns. On the 18th of October, 2019, please don't forget the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security, in partnership with the World Economic Forum and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, hosted Event 201 in New York. This exercise, according to the website, illustrated areas where public-private partnerships will be necessary during the response to a severe pandemic in order to diminish large-scale economic and societal consequences. In January 2020, we were receiving images to ramp up the fear that was coming in from China. These two were taken from a photographer from AFP in France and shared on news outlets all over, including NBC News in America. There was a person lying on the ground on their back wearing a mask. Apparently, we're supposed to believe the person dropped dead of COVID, although I don't think anyone falls on their backs when they drop dead. Then we have another image of a man from the same location wearing a mask, casually cycling past the body. Another image of two people in what looked like spacesuits waiting for the director to tell them what to do. It's what it looks like they're doing. Then, as of 19th of March 2020, according to the UK government, so this is 4 days before Boris Johnson told us that we were locking up, it said COVID-19 is no longer considered to be a high consequence infectious disease in the UK. It said they had taken an interim decision in January 2020 to classify COVID as an HCID, and they had determined that several features have now changed. In particular, more information is available about mortality rates, low overall. So they knew the whole time before they locked us up that there weren't very many people dying from whatever was happening. Here's a slide here from Professor Martin Neal, who's a statistician, that he shared in his talk at our Common Knowledge Edinburgh Scottish People's COVID Inquiry Conference last month, where he did some really deep analysis in Scottish care home data. He found there were no excess deaths in 2020 until immediately after the lockdown started on the 23rd of March, and excess deaths continued until the lockdown ended on the 29th of May, indicating that there was nothing to do with this so-called virus that was so-called circulating. His evidence-based conclusions were that, at the end of his talk, based on statistical analysis, actual evidence, no evidence of viral pathogenicity before the behavioral changes were implemented on us, the reattribution of deaths to COVID from other causes, deaths that did occur caused by the medical and public health response were not due to a novel virus. Every single policy not only failed to mitigate death from the so-called virus, but evidently made the situation worse. The COVID event was created primarily by fraudulent PCR testing, changes to coding of deaths, and iatrogenesis, and ultimately there was no pandemic. So all of these inquiries that are happening, including the ones in Scotland and the one in London, are just cover-ups. I'm actually working on an article about this right now, about inquiries being government cover-ups. Here's some other things going on right now in the media where they're still trying to confuse us and scare us and create more propaganda. There's Matt Hancock saying on the Daily Mirror on the 20th of March, saying he'd do it all again. So thanks, Matt Hancock, for that. This continues. There's a newspaper in South Wales that shared over the weekend on Facebook this graphic from the NHS saying you only have until the 31st of March for a walk-in COVID vaccination. So you've just got just about a week now. There's a Newcastle paper called ChronicleLive I was reading over the weekend that published the results of a survey they conducted with readers, which said 98% of readers said that England could have handled the pandemic better. Yeah, okay. 37% of them felt that the country was right to have gone into lockdown. So that's a majority that didn't think that something was handled correctly. And 79% said that the NHS has not recovered from COVID, which is kind of a problem considering the fact that we had to go into lockdown to save the NHS, apparently. But in some small ways, I guess in a bit of hope, there's a little mainstream coverage that's starting to change. I saw this in the Telegraph on the 15th of March, written by Daniel Hannan, who's a former MEP. And just a quote from this, never forget that making Britain into a broke, repressive dystopia was a deliberate choice. Just 5 years ago, our leaders doomed us to a spiral of decline by failing to stand up to lockdown fanatics. We don't like to admit that we destroyed our economy, took away part of our kids' childhoods, permanently aggrandized the state, and indebted ourselves for a generation, all for nothing. Brian.
Diane, thank you very much. I'll just add to that, of course, in that slide where it was talking about a deliberate choice, was it a choice for the wider public? Because the government was using their behavioural insights team, the government was using applied psychology in order to distort the way people thought, in order to make them fearful and anxious, in order to get them to comply. And for me, this is one of the critical things we must never forget, that the government, the MPs, senior civil servants prepared to use pretty malicious applied psychology in order to get us to do what they want. Let's look at that in another context, and let's move on to the subject of Ukraine.